Rescue teams found their gear, their footprints, even the torn tents. But not a single body, and no one ever answered the radio again. You're watching Mr. 13 O'Clock, where the air thins and the horror gets deeper. Tonight's descent into fear. 13 true, scary mountain climbing horror stories. Subscribe if you're ready to climb into the unknown. And comment below. Where in the world are you watching from? Some mountains are unmapped for a reason. Not because they're undiscovered, but because someone made sure they were forgotten. It started with a blog post, a now-deleted forum thread buried in the travel section of an obscure hiking site. Titled simply, "The Peak That Watches Back." Nobody took it seriously. Just another piece of digital folklore. Until Max Carrington, a 32-year-old experienced climber, decided to chase it down. Max wasn't a thrill seeker. He was methodical. A former cartographer-turned-wilderness guide who'd mapped hundreds of remote trails in the Rockies. What caught his attention wasn't the spooky name of the post. It was the coordinates embedded in the comment section, posted by someone calling themselves the Last Descender. The location pointed somewhere deep in the Canadian Rockies, past any marked trail, past the known range. A snow-covered stretch that looked normal on satellite view, but something was off. The lighting looked manipulated. A shadow that didn't match the sun's angle. A ridgeline that bent impossibly. He called it the Phantom Summit. Max documented the entire journey on his GoPro. Days 1 and 2 were uneventful. Deep snow, sheer winds, and the occasional avalanche warning. On day 3, the GPS started glitching. It showed his altitude increasing even when he was at rest. Compass needles spun slowly, like they were underwater. Still, Max pressed forward. By day 5, the footage takes a turn. The sky above the ridge is static gray. No clouds, no sun, just a blank void. The trees thin out, replaced by brittle, colorless shrubs. He stops speaking to the camera. His notes become erratic. Camped near edge. Snow tastes off. No animal tracks. Winds sound like voices. That was the last journal entry before Max summited the peak. When search and rescue found his camp weeks later, everything was intact. Tent, supplies, even his boots neatly placed inside. But Max was gone. No signs of a fall. No signs of animal activity. Just a trail of bare footprints leading up the mountain. The last image pulled from his GoPro is still debated. The angle is strange, as if the camera was tilted upward and slightly behind him. A silhouette is visible, tall and distorted, standing at the summit. Some say it was just Max, captured mid-step. Others aren't so sure. The proportions are off. The limbs too long. The shadow cast backward, even though the light came from behind. Here's where it gets stranger. After the footage was recovered, several online cartographers tried mapping the summit. They couldn't. Every time they marked it, the terrain data corrupted. One even claimed her laptop fried when she tried rendering the elevation layers. Topographical records for that grid square show nothing but flat forest land. Old Canadian geological surveys from the 70s list the area as inaccessible due to instability. But no rock slides were ever recorded there. No seismic activity. Just a blank spot, marked with one word, redacted. Why would a mountain be redacted? Max's brother, Jared, went public with the footage a year later, desperate for answers. He received an anonymous email less than 24 hours after posting it. No name, no subject line, just 6 words. Some summits are not for us. He took the video down that same day. But by then, it had already spread. Reddit threads dissected the audio. Some claimed you could hear whispering in the wind near the summit. A low, repeating chant, hard to make out. Others said the footage causes nausea if you watch in full. There's a theory, one that circulates mostly in deep horror forums and ARG communities, that there are false summits, geological entities that appear as mountains, but aren't really made of earth or stone. They're like lures, anchored to reality just enough to draw people in. Once you breach their elevation, you're no longer in our version of the world. According to this theory, Max didn't vanish. He just crossed a threshold we're not supposed to cross. A researcher from Alberta University once reached out to Jared. She specialized in topographic anomalies. She said there were records from the 1930s, strange reports from fur trappers and mountaineers. They spoke of a white mountain that grows when you're not looking, of time stretching, then snapping back, of climbing for hours only to descend into a place darker than night. One trapper claimed he scaled it during a snowstorm, reached a clearing where he saw multiple versions of himself climbing behind him. He never went back, died in his sleep weeks later. Heart attack. But his final entry? Just 3 words. Mountain watches back. What does it mean for a summit to watch? Can a mountain be aware? It's easy to dismiss these stories. Blizzards cause hallucinations. Elevation sickness can distort memory. But it's the patterns that haunt you, the silence, the missing time, the coordinates that keep vanishing from maps no matter how often they're saved. And most chilling of all, a satellite scan from 2023 accidentally caught the peak during an orbital recalibration. A single frame, one that wasn't meant to be stored. Engineers later flagged the image for deletion due to structural anomalies. What anomaly? A crack in the summit, wide and jagged, like an eye slowly beginning to open. To this day, no official expedition has returned from that coordinate. The area is now fenced off, listed as unstable ground. But the mountain, if you even want to call it that, still appears in some weather satellite feeds, shifting ever so slightly, like it's breathing beneath the snow. Some say Max is still up there, not alive in the way we understand it, but echoing, caught in some echo chamber of a place that shouldn't exist. And if you find yourself deep in the Rockies, somewhere no path has tread, and your compass spins, you might be closer to it than you think. Just remember, not every summit is meant to be reached. Some are meant to be left alone, because once you climb them, they never let you come down. The higher you climb, the closer you get to the sky. But no one ever talks about what's already waiting up there. It wasn't a storm, nor the cold, nor a misstep that almost killed 3 hikers on Mt. Elbert in Colorado. It was a woman who should have been dead for 2 days, but was still waving from the cliffside. This story begins on the 6th day of a 9-day climbing trip. 3 friends in their late 20s, all experienced hikers, attempting a winter ascent of Mt. Elbert, the highest peak in the Rockies. They were physically trained, mentally prepared, and GPS equipped. But none of them could explain what happened once they reached the western ridge. According to the trip logs, the weather had been stable, clear skies, mild winds. But at 5:42 p.m., the lead hiker's GoPro footage abruptly ends mid-sentence. What it captures just before cutting out is haunting. At the edge of a snow-coated bluff, there's a woman standing silently, her back turned, her coat fluttering unnaturally even though the wind appears still. One of the hikers, Zach, calls out to her, but she doesn't react until she slowly raises one arm and waves. Not wildly, just a soft, stiff motion. Mechanical, like she's rehearsed it. They describe her in later interviews. Pale skin, chin-length black hair, boots too thin for mountain terrain, and a coat that looked dated, like something from the 90s. But what disturbed them most? She wasn't wearing any climbing gear. No buck, no poles, no gloves. And she was standing far too close to the cliff's edge, too close for any sane person. They tried approaching, cautiously, but the terrain became unstable with each step, as if the mountain didn't want them to get closer. One of the hikers, Dean, took a photo on his phone, but later, when they tried to review it, the image was corrupted. The file name simply read 0001_void. That night, their tent shook violently despite the calm forecast. No wind warnings, no seismic activity, but the tent poles bent inward like something was pressing on them. When they unzipped the flap, there was no one there, just fresh boot prints in the snow. Small, narrow ones, like a woman's. The next day, they debated abandoning the climb. But Zach, ever the skeptic, insisted it had to be a prank or an exhausted illusion. He believed they were letting altitude sickness mess with their heads. But that evening, something changed. They descended slightly to set up camp on safer ground. At around 3:17 a.m., Dean woke up gasping. He said he heard a woman screaming outside the tent, but when the others woke, there was only silence. No echo, no prints, just their own breath in the cold air. Later, they retraced their path to the ridge. That's when they found the old memorial plaque, rusted, half buried in ice. It read, "In memory of Elizabeth G. Warren. Lost to the ridge, February 14th, 1998. May the mountain keep you." None of them had seen it before, not on the way up and not on any maps. Later research confirmed the memorial was real. Elizabeth Warren had vanished during a solo winter hike in '98. Her body was never found, just her pack, boots, and climbing axe scattered hundreds of feet below the cliff. According to archive rescue reports, she was last seen by two other climbers, who both described seeing her standing too close to the edge, waving. When one of them shouted for her to step back, she didn't answer. She just kept waving until she suddenly wasn't there anymore. But here's where it turns darker. In their return footage, when Dean was reviewing Zach's GoPro files again, a single frame had glitched during playback. They paused it, enhanced it, and saw something that didn't make sense. The woman's face, frozen mid-wave, was blank. No eyes, no mouth, no features, just smooth, pale skin and a faint, vertical crack running from her forehead to her chin, almost like porcelain. Psychologists often talk about the uncanny valley, the unsettling feeling when something looks almost human, but not quite. Our brains are wired to notice even the slightest off detail in a face. And sometimes, those details are wrong for a reason. Some believe the mountain didn't take Elizabeth by accident. There's an old Ute legend, rarely told outside indigenous circles, about the Whisper Woman, a pale spirit who lingers near cliff faces, mimicking the lost, the missing, the mourned. She doesn't scream or chase. She simply appears where someone once died and waves, waiting to lure the next soul off balance. Skeptics argue that stories like this stem from altitude-induced hallucinations, dehydration, or cold weather psychosis. And in many ways, that explanation is comforting. Because if it's not the mountain playing tricks on the mind, then it means something else wants to be seen. In an eerily similar case in 2015, a solo climber in Alberta reported seeing a woman with no face waving to him from a narrow ledge. When he tried to photograph her, his phone overheated and shut down, despite being in freezing temperatures. His footage, too, was corrupted. Two hikers went missing on that same ridge 2 weeks later. In the 2023 incident on Mount Elbert, all three hikers made it down alive, but none of them returned to alpine hiking again. Dean moved to Florida. Zach sold all his gear. And the third hiker, Chris, deleted every photo he took from the trip. When asked why, he simply said, "She waved at me. I waved back. I don't know why I did." To this day, there's no official record of the woman's reappearance, no memorial upkeep, and no explanation for the interference captured in their footage. But the final seconds of that last GoPro file, before the battery dies completely, captures one last image. Just the cliffside, the edge of the ridge, and a woman's arm slowly rising into frame to wave. Above 14,000 feet, the human mind starts to unravel. Oxygen thins. Logic warps. You begin to see things that aren't there, or worse, things that are. And sometimes, what you find on the mountain shouldn't be found at all. We were 3 days into the ascent. Me, my friend Casey, and our guide Mateo, climbing a lesser-known stretch of the Rockies, one of those unmarketed peaks the serious climbers whisper about in forums. No trails, no park rangers, just vertical granite, unstable weather, and bone-deep silence. Exactly the kind of climb thrill seekers romanticize and locals avoid. Our base camp that night sat at 13,800 feet, right near the ridgeline that would take us to the summit by morning. The wind howled like a choir of wolves. Even with our insulated tents and gear, the cold had a way of slipping past every layer, settling into the spaces behind your eyes and beneath your ribs. Sometime around 2:30 a.m., I woke up, not to a sound, exactly, but to a presence. That electric feeling when you're being watched, and you don't know why. Our tent flapped against the gusts, and through the thin nylon walls, I could make out two things clearly. the dull glow of Casey's headlamp inside his tent across from ours, and something else. A second tent, about 20 feet away. Only, we didn't set up a second tent. I stared at it for a long time. It wasn't one of ours. Wrong color, wrong shape, more like a yurt than a climber's tent. No logos, no footprints in the snow around it. Just there, a dome, half lit from within by something pale and flickering, like candlelight. I zipped open the tent slowly, thinking maybe someone else had climbed ahead and we hadn't noticed. But that was impossible. This route wasn't even on record. We were the only ones with GPS logs in this area for weeks. I called out, low and cautious. "Hey, you good over there?" No answer. Just wind. I stepped outside. The snow crunched beneath me, but the tent ahead? No movement. No shifting shadows. No breath cloud in the air. And I remember thinking, it looked old, like it had been there a long time. Fabric stiff with frost. The entrance flaps sagging. I walked toward it. My headlamp flickered. I remember the snow beneath me suddenly didn't feel right. Not soft and powdery, but crusted like I was walking on something buried beneath. Bones? Supplies? Ice? I don't know. My instincts screamed to stop, but I didn't. I reached the flap and listened. And that's when I heard it. A voice. Muffled, rhythmic, like someone whispering on repeat. It wasn't in English. Maybe not in any language. Just low, circular syllables. Chanting. Whispering. I turned back. Casey was watching from his tent, eyes wide. Mateo was still asleep, or pretending to be. And then, the whispering stopped. Just silence. I opened the flap. Inside was no one. Just a lantern, flickering weakly. An empty sleeping bag. Melted snow pooled at the base. And next to it, a photograph, black and white, water-damaged. 3 people standing at a summit, smiling. But their faces had been scratched out. Deeply. Repeatedly. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, the tent was gone. Not packed up. Not collapsed. Gone. No footprints. No fabric. No photograph. Just a circle of frost-burned ground where it had stood, like something ancient had thawed and then left. Mateo swore we were just tired. Altitude hallucination, he called it. But know what I saw? So did Casey. Neither of us spoke during the final stretch to the summit. We just climbed, quiet, watching the snow, listening for that whispering. Here's where it gets stranger. Back home, a few weeks later, I started digging through online records of lost climbers in the area. Not many exist. This peak was practically undocumented. But I did find a single report from 1998. A man named James Toller, age 31, and 2 friends vanished near the same elevation. The last entry in his climbing journal? Set up tent. Lights on the ridge. Voices in the dark. No one should be here. That photo I found, faces scratched out, was sent anonymously to the ranger's office a month after their disappearance. No return address. Just a note that read, "They're still up there, just not how you remember them." And here's the part I've never told anyone. Sometimes at night, when it's quiet and the wind whistles through the trees outside my apartment, I hear the same chanting. Faint, circular, like a voice remembering something ancient, like a warning meant for someone else, but whispered too close. It never lasts long, but it's always there, just long enough to remind me. Some tents on the mountain are never meant to be found. And if you do, don't open them. Some voices sound human, but aren't. And sometimes, they don't echo like they should. That's what we noticed when we followed the wrong voice in the Rockies. It didn't bounce. It didn't fade. It just pulled us deeper. It began as a late summer climb, nothing extreme. Just 2 friends pushing to summit a well-traveled peak in Colorado. I'd done it before. My best friend Daniel hadn't. So we took it slow, steady. 2 nights in the Alpine, 1 summit push, then back down before the storm rolled in. We were cautious. We packed smart. No shortcuts, no off-trail wandering. But none of that mattered when night came early. The climb up was uneventful. We made camp in a small basin just below the tree line, far enough from avalanche zones, close enough to make summit in a half day. The mountains were quiet, but not in a peaceful way. No birdsong, no wind. Even the trees stood still, as if they were waiting for something. On the second night, everything changed. Around 11 p.m., I woke up suddenly, not from cold or discomfort. I didn't even know why at first, until I heard it. A voice. Soft. Distant. Calling my name. It wasn't urgent or panicked. More like someone who'd found something and wanted to share it. Jason. Pause. Then again. Jason. Daniel was asleep beside me, snoring quietly. I sat up, heart thudding, and listened. The voice wasn't close, but it wasn't far either, somewhere just beyond the tree line. I stepped outside the tent, clutching my flashlight. The night was moonless, and the world had that thick, inky stillness you only find above 10,000 feet. My breath fogged instantly. I heard the voice again. Jason, come see. It sounded familiar, but wrong. Like someone wearing my brother's voice, but missing the cadence, the warmth. It had a flatness to it. Emotionless, but not mechanical. Just off. Then Daniel stepped out behind me. You heard that too? He asked. I nodded. He looked pale, jaw clenched. I thought I was dreaming, he whispered. We listened again. It called once more, this time softer. Not louder, just more inside us, somehow. Jason, this way. Here's where we made our first mistake. We followed, not because we were stupid or because horror stories need a twist, but because something compelled us. That voice didn't just speak, it suggested. Planted thoughts. Like, what if someone's hurt out there? What if it's a hiker who needs help? What if it's your fault if they die? And deep down, another feeling grew. It knows our names. It already knows where we are. We didn't grab our gear, just flashlights and boots. We crossed the stream behind camp and slipped into the trees, trying to trace the voice. That's when we noticed something off. The woods didn't sound right. There was no crunch of branches, no wind. Our flashlights lit the path, but shadows seemed delayed, as if the darkness was thinking about whether to move. Daniel whispered, Do you feel like we're going downhill? I hadn't noticed, but yes. Barely. A slow decline. That was strange. Our map showed no descent past the camp, just steep inclines to the peak or back the way we came. But this path was smooth. Too smooth. And there was no trail. Jason. It was closer now, but always ahead. Never behind. Never circling. Always leading. We walked like that for maybe 30 minutes, though time felt wrong. Slippery. My hands were numb. My thoughts were fuzzy. It was as if we were sinking into something heavier than night. Then Daniel stopped cold. Wait, he said. There's only one set of prints. I swung my light down. He was right. Just mine. We checked behind us. Nothing. Our steps weren't being left. The snow, or dirt, or whatever we'd been walking on, was smooth behind us like it was erasing the moment we passed. I shivered. Not from cold. Daniel whispered, Do you smell that? I did. It was faint but distinct, like rust and whetstone. Not blood. Not quite, but close. That's when the voice changed. It stopped saying my name. Instead, it began humming. A slow, broken melody. High then low. Off-key. Like someone remembering a lullaby wrong. Daniel gripped my arm hard. Jason, that's what I heard in my dream last night. We turned around. Nothing. No trees. No trail. Just dark. And that hum, circling us now. That's when we realized we hadn't gone off trail. The trail had vanished. There was no map that could show us where we were. Our compasses spun slowly, like lazy dancers. Our phones? Dead, though fully charged an hour before. We ran. No direction. Just away from the hum, away from the smell. The trees around us grew dense, unnatural. Too tall. Too still. Too wrong. Then Daniel tripped. He tumbled into a dip, some old gully or dry creek bed. I scrambled after him, light flickering wildly. And then silence. No hum. Just us panting, shaking, surrounded by an eerie stillness. And then light, but not from our flashlights. A glow, pale green, pulsing softly through the trees. Not fire, not moon, not anything I've seen in the natural world. We crouched, frozen. The light shifted, and something moved within it. Tall, slender, silhouetted, watching. It didn't approach, just stood, arms too long, head tilted, observing, like it was studying how we reacted to fear. Then the hum began again, but from behind us. That's when we ran, truly terrified. Not toward safety, just away. And the voice laughed. It wasn't a human laugh. It was like an echo learning how to mock. We didn't find camp. We didn't find anything that night. Just more woods, more silence, until sunrise, when we stumbled into a ranger cabin nearly 6 miles east of where our GPS had last pinged. The ranger was stunned. "You hiked through Dead Hollow?" he asked. We didn't answer, because there was no such place on our map. We tried to return later with a search team. Our gear, our footprints, our campsite. Nothing. Not a single trace. But one thing haunts me still. As we descended with the rangers, one of them turned to me and said, "You're lucky. You followed something, but it let you go. Most folks who hear the voice out here." He trailed off. I asked what happens to them. He didn't answer. He just shook his head and walked a little faster. Altitude messes with your mind. Oxygen gets thin, shadows grow long, and sometimes you see things that shouldn't be there. But what if the mountain isn't just playing tricks on you? What if something else is watching, waiting for someone to stray off trail? This happened in the Wind River Range of Wyoming. It's a place known for jagged granite peaks and thin air. Me and my climbing partner, Tyler, had been training for a big summit, Gannett Peak. Remote, rugged, the kind of place you go to get away from everything. Or so we thought. We'd been on the trail for 2 days. By the third morning, things started feeling off. It wasn't the weather. It wasn't the gear. It was something colder, harder to name. The silence had changed. Not the usual mountain quiet. This was the kind that presses on your ears like you're being buried under it. Even Tyler noticed. He kept looking over his shoulder like we were being followed. We chalked it up to altitude nerves, but there was a growing tension between us, like the mountain was listening. We set up camp at about 11,000 feet near a glacial lake. The sun set early behind the cliffs, and with it, any sense of safety. Around midnight, I woke up. No sound, no wind, but I could see something moving outside the tent. Just a shape at first. Someone standing, still and alert, on the ridge above us. At first I thought it was Tyler. Maybe he'd gone out to relieve himself. But I turned, and he was still zipped up in his sleeping bag, mouth slightly open, breathing slow. So, who was on the ridge? I told myself it was just a trick of the moonlight, maybe a boulder casting a weird shadow. But when I blinked, the figure had moved closer, still standing upright, still watching. I didn't sleep after that. The next day, I didn't tell Tyler. What would I even say? Hey, I saw someone up here in the middle of nowhere just watching us. We were miles from the nearest ranger station, and no one else had signed a trail log. We should have been alone. Around noon, we began our summit push. The ridge grew narrower, steeper, more exposed. That's when I saw him again. This time, closer. A man, maybe mid-30s, wearing old gear, like 90s era, dusty canvas and a torn pack. He was standing just ahead, maybe 100 feet up at the bend in the ridge. Not moving, not looking at us, just facing the cliffside. I called out. He didn't respond. But when I waved, he nodded. A slow, heavy nod, like someone acknowledging a death. Tyler looked confused when I mentioned him. He said there was no one up ahead. No man look? He just turned that corner. But when we got there, nothing. No footprints. No trace. And the trail forked unexpectedly, even though our map showed it as a straight route to the summit. One path climbed steeper toward where I thought I'd seen him. The other dipped into a narrow gully that looked wrong, like it didn't belong there. I felt pulled toward the steeper route. I told Tyler I'd check it out. He insisted we stay together, but something in me whispered otherwise. Like gravity had shifted, pointing me in a direction I wasn't meant to ignore. So I went ahead. The trail wound higher. Loose rocks. Thin air. And then I saw him again, further up, always just out of reach. But this time he looked back at me. His eyes were pale. Too pale. Like they hadn't seen sunlight in years. And he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not even threatening. Just empty. That's when I noticed something else. The silence had returned. No wind. No birds. Even my own footsteps felt muffled. I looked down the ridge. No Tyler. I shouted his name. No answer. Panic rose fast. The kind of panic that doesn't give you time to think, only to run. But as I turned back the way I'd come, the trail behind me had changed. It was gone. In its place was a sheer drop. No switchback, no ledge. Just air. And below, clouds rolling like smoke. I turned to the man. He was gone too. All I had was rock, ice, and a whispering wind that wasn't there before. I stayed still, afraid any movement would make the mountain collapse beneath me. Then I heard it, Tyler's voice. Faint, echoing up from somewhere impossible. "Where are you?" But I couldn't see him. I climbed higher, hoping for a signal, a clearer view, anything. That's when I found it. A single climbing boot, half buried in scree. Old, cracked leather. And next to it, an ice axe with initials carved into the handle. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just remember running, down, sideways, anywhere the slope allowed. Eventually, I found Tyler again. He looked shaken. He said I'd been missing for 3 hours, that I never turned up the ridge, that I'd simply vanished after we reached the fork. He said I was never ahead of him, that he'd followed the steep trail, shouting for me the whole way, and I'd never been there. Back at base camp, we checked the trail logs again. Just us. No one had signed in above 9,000 feet for over a week. But someone was there. I asked a ranger if any accidents had happened up near the summit in the past. He looked uneasy and said yes, about 15 years ago. A man had gone missing, last seen near the same ridge. His body was never recovered. When I asked for his name, the ranger paused. "Daniel C. Harker," he said. "Why?" I showed him the initials on the axe. DCH. He didn't say another word. I still dream about the ridge sometimes. About the man with the empty eyes. About the trail that led to nowhere. And about that moment, when I looked back and the path was simply gone, like it had never existed. There's a saying in climbing. The mountain doesn't want you to summit. It only lets you try. But what if there are things on that mountain that don't want you to come back at all? Some climbers talk about summit fever, an obsession so intense it clouds judgment, pushes people past exhaustion, and sometimes leads them to their deaths. But what if reaching the top didn't just break your body, but broke reality itself? They say the mountain changes you. But no one ever warned us that the mountain itself might not be what it seems. It was July of 2019 when two experienced mountaineers, Lena and her older brother Malcolm, set out to summit a remote peak in the southern Andes. The locals didn't even call it by name. On maps, it was labeled simply Pico Noob, Cloud Peak. It wasn't part of any popular climbing circuit. The terrain was punishing, weather unpredictable, and legends old. They'd heard the warnings. Not just the usual altitude sickness, crevasses, or rockfall, but odd ones. Strange phrases like, "Watch the sky before the summit," or "Don't stay long above the whisper line." Locals spoke with an unease that had nothing to do with snowpack or storms. But Malcolm had grown cynical with time. "Every mountain has ghost stories," he said. "It's just altitude-induced paranoia." They were wrong. The first 3 days went as expected. Cold, challenging, breathtaking. At 10,000 feet, Lena started noticing the silence. The birds had stopped. Even the wind felt distant, like sound itself was thinner. By the 4th day, the compass began acting erratically. Needles spinning. The GPS froze. Malcolm brushed it off as magnetic interference. They pressed on. That night, they camped just below the final ascent. At that altitude, the sky should have been dazzling with stars. Instead, it was flat, almost like a dull sheet of slate, a color Lena would later describe as the absence of blue. She woke around 3 a.m. to find Malcolm outside the tent, staring upward. Just staring. "Do you hear it?" he asked. "Hear what?" He didn't answer. They began the summit push at sunrise. But there was no sunrise. The world seemed dim and overcast, even though no clouds moved overhead. It was as if they were walking under a fall sky. A sky painted with the idea of day, but missing all its warmth. The snow under their boots had a strange crunch. Not soft, not icy, hollow, as though something beneath listened. At 15,000 feet, they saw what they thought was the summit. A spire of black rock jutting into the sky like a dagger. The trail twisted unnaturally toward it. Every step felt off, like the mountain's incline shifted slightly when they weren't looking. And then, finally, they reached the peak. But the sky didn't turn blue. Instead, everything stopped. The wind, the sound, even a frost in the air. Lena would later describe the moment as stepping out of time. The air had weight to it, pressing against her skin like water. Malcolm turned in slow motion, mouth opening, but no words emerged. The sky wasn't just dark, it was watching. Not metaphorically. Something enormous, circular, and faintly glowing pulsed behind the clouds. It looked almost like a massive eye trying to focus. And then came the whisper. It wasn't in their ears, it was inside, beneath the bone. A low hum that translated to meaning without words. A pressure that hinted at thoughts not their own. You should not be here. Lena collapsed, gripping her temples. Her vision swam with impossible shapes, patterns that looped into themselves, structures that defied gravity and meaning. Malcolm stood rigid. He whispered, "It's looking at us." She doesn't remember how long they stood there. Minutes? Hours? But eventually they descended. Or rather, they were allowed to descend. That's how Lena describes it, as if whatever lived above the peak released them. But something was wrong. The mountain had changed. The snow patterns, le terrain, even the rocks were different, etched with symbols that hadn't been there before. And the sky remained gray. Even back at base camp, it never turned blue. The sun rose, but there was no warmth. No birds, no shadows. They tried returning to town, but the trail forked in unfamiliar ways. What should have been a 6-hour trek turned into 3 days of wandering. When they finally made it to the nearest village, something was off. The people didn't recognize them, not just in a casual way. The photos in their phones had changed, different clothes, different timestamps. Their summit selfie was still there, but the peak behind them was unrecognizable. It wasn't Pico Noob. It wasn't any known mountain. The local guide who helped them leave had lived there for 40 years. He claimed that Pico Noob was just a term for dense fog banks. No one had ever climbed a peak by that name. And the area they described? He said it was just rolling hills, no cliffs, no snowline, no trail. Lena tried reaching friends back home. Her number was disconnected. Her email bounced. Even her passport was flagged as incomplete. She and Malcolm tried returning to the mountain, only to find that the path they took no longer existed. Satellite maps showed no such peak, no recorded elevation, as if the entire climb had been erased. And the sky above them? Still gray. Always gray. Doctors diagnosed Lena with acute derealization, a stress disorder. But she insists it's more than that. She says she never truly came back. That Malcolm isn't the same either. He speaks less now, sleeps even less, spends his nights staring at the ceiling, eyes wide, mumbling things in a language she doesn't recognize. He draws strange patterns in notebooks, spirals that go nowhere, symbols with eyes. She tried burning one of the notebooks. It didn't catch fire. In a final attempt to make sense of things, Lena emailed a researcher of fringe geological phenomena, someone who had written about temporal anomalies at high elevation. He responded with a single sentence. There are summits not meant to be reached. Some peaks are thresholds, not destinations. She hasn't climbed since. But sometimes when she looks up, she swears she sees the faint outline of that eye again, hidden just behind the clouds, watching, waiting, and the sky, still, hasn't turned blue. Not once. Glaciers move slowly, imperceptibly, but always forward. They grind mountains to dust and swallow time itself. But in 2021, 3 climbers in the Cordillera Blanca range of Peru recorded something underneath one, a sound that no one could explain. A human scream, distant, hollow, and impossibly deep beneath the ice. It began with a summit attempt that should have been routine. Mateo, Isaac, and Lena, experienced climbers with over a dozen international ascents, planned a winter route along the Quebrada Alpamayo. It was a narrow, glacier-fed valley, mostly silent, except for the occasional creak of shifting ice. But on their second night at Base Camp 2, things changed. The first sign was the wind. It didn't move like normal. Instead of rushing down the slope in waves, it pulsed like breathing. The kind of rhythm you don't notice until you've heard it for too long. Isaac joked it was the mountain exhaling, but none of them laughed. It didn't feel like a joke. That night, as they lay zipped in their sleeping bags, a sharp cracking noise echoed beneath them. Not a surface ice shift. Deeper. Then silence. Then came the scream. Not loud. Not even close. But unmistakable. A human scream. Trapped. Distant. Reverberating like it was echoing through frozen stone. Lena unzipped the tent so fast the zipper snapped. The three of them stood in the darkness, headlamps off, too stunned to move. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a vibration in the gut, a tremble behind the eyes. The kind of scream that doesn't just ask for help, it accuses. They assumed, at first, it had to be another team. Maybe someone had fallen into a crevasse nearby. But when they radioed the ranger station the next morning, the answer was chilling. No other groups had been registered for that route in over a week. Still, rationality is a powerful sedative. They searched the area around camp, probing the snow, checking for signs of a fall or misplaced equipment. Nothing. Just ice, sky, and silence. They planned to descend the next morning. But when dawn came, Mateo was gone. Not gone like wandered off. His sleeping bag was zipped, empty. His boots were gone, but his ice tools, jacket, and pack were still there. No note, no trail, just a single line of boot prints leading away from the tent, straight toward the glacier, and ending at a narrow depression in the ice. It wasn't a crack. It wasn't even wide enough to be considered a proper crevasse. Just a shallow sinkhole, barely large enough for a person to slide into, feet first. Isaac dropped a flare into it. It vanished after 4 seconds. No echo. No impact sound. That night, the screaming came again. But this time, it didn't echo from one direction. It came from all around. The ground itself seemed to hum with it. Lena recorded it on her phone, but the playback the next day was corrupted, static, and distortion, like a corrupted VHS tape. But the timestamp was intact. 3:17 a.m. exactly when they heard it. Here's where the analysis gets strange. When Lena returned home, she sent the audio file to a sound engineer friend, someone who specialized in restoring degraded analog media. After several attempts, he claimed the frequency pattern looked familiar. Not in a musical sense, but biological. According to him, the waveform mirrored the acoustic patterns of infrasound, extremely low-frequency vibrations emitted by large mammals in distress. Whales, elephants. But this one was wrong. The wavelength was longer than anything made by an earthly creature, and somehow laced with higher harmonics that resembled the structure of a human scream. He suggested, offhandedly, half joking, that the glacier might be holding trapped sound, a concept called acoustic entombment. In theory, layers of shifting ice could isolate and compress old sound waves, like a vault. Lena didn't laugh, because she'd started hearing the scream again. Not in the mountains. In her home. In her dreams. Sometimes during showers, when the pipes clicked a certain way. Once on a subway platform, the sound of the train hitting the brakes made her collapse, because it was the same pitch, the same tone, that same scream. Isaac never spoke to anyone after the descent. He deleted all his social media, moved to a cabin near Lake Superior, and stopped responding to messages. But Lena received a handwritten letter 3 months later. It contained only a drawing, a perfect, detailed rendering of the glacier. At the center, in the depression where Mateo vanished, Isaac had drawn a narrow mouth, open, cracked, and rimmed with tiny, jagged teeth. No note, no explanation. Several years before this incident, a Chilean researcher named Dr. Fausto Leva published an obscure paper on glacial acoustic anomalies. It was mostly dismissed, too speculative, too poetic. But one quote stood out, buried deep in the abstract. They're frequencies that glaciers absorb and never release. Sounds not meant for the human ear. Perhaps it is not only water and rock they trap, but memory. And perhaps, sometimes, memory screams. To this day, Lena refuses to discuss what happened during her final night on the glacier. All she's ever said publicly is this: we thought the mountain was hollow, but it wasn't. It was full. And if you zoom in on the satellite image of that ridge now, the one captured a month after the incident, you'll see something chilling. A thin red discoloration along the depression's edge. Not blood, not paint. A mineral deposit, geologists said. But when enhanced, the pattern it creates is uncanny. Like veins, or worse, fingerprints. Whatever screamed from beneath that glacier, it may not have been trapped. It may have been waiting. They say altitude messes with your mind, starves your brain of oxygen, makes you see things that aren't really there. But what if it's not just your brain playing tricks? What if something wants to be seen? Back in 2019, a seasoned climber named Marla R. was making her fourth ascent of Mount Masora, a lesser-known but infamously unforgiving peak in the Pacific Northwest. Not deadly because of its altitude, but because of its isolation. No cell service, no ranger stations, just dense forest, sheer cliffs, and weather that turned on you like a switchblade. Marla wasn't new to danger. She'd climbed parts of the Andes, trekked across Greenland, and soloed several high-altitude routes across the Rockies. But Masora held a strange draw for her, like a dare whispered only in dreams. She always said the mountain felt wrong in the air, but she couldn't stop going back. Her plan was a 3-day climb, solo. She started early, light pack, confident pace. The tree line came late that afternoon, a jagged seam of evergreens giving way to windswept rock and snow. That's when she first saw it. A cabin. Old. Wooden. Tucked awkwardly against a cliff face. No path to it. No prints in the snow. No smoke. Just sitting there like it had been dropped from above. She paused and stared, unsure what to make of it. Cabins don't exist above the tree line on Masora. There's no record of it. No mention in any climber forums or topographical maps. The mountain's too steep, too unstable for construction. But there it was, timbers dark with age, shutters loose and flapping in the windless silence. Marla said she didn't feel afraid, yet, just confused. She chalked it up to an old ranger post or a hunting cabin, even though the area hadn't seen legal hunting in decades. She approached. The snow didn't crunch. The sound was muted, as if her ears had been stuffed with cotton. The door was slightly ajar. She didn't go in. That's something she was proud of, something she clung to later. But she did peer through the gap. And inside it was strange. No furniture, just walls of faded wallpaper and a floor of mismatched boards. But what stood out were the mirrors, 7 of them, hanging on each wall, all different sizes, all angled inward toward the center of the room. She could only see a sliver of the floor through the crack in the door, but she remembered it vividly. A black stain, circular, perfectly symmetrical, not spilled, not weather damage. A mark. She stepped back and snapped a photo. But when she checked the preview, the screen was black. She tried again, still black. Her phone was fully charged, but now was frozen. Wouldn't shut off. Wouldn't do anything. Marla backed away and continued her ascent. She said she kept glancing over her shoulder, and the cabin looked smaller each time. Not farther, smaller, as if it were shrinking or withdrawing. By sunset, she'd set up camp half a mile from the summit. The wind was heavy that night. It brought with it the low groan of shifting ice and something else. A rhythmic creaking sound, like old hinges, like a door slowly opening and closing. Opening and closing. She told herself it was just the mountain talking. When she woke the next morning, everything was calm. The sky had cleared. She scanned the ridge below with her binoculars, where the cabin should have been. Nothing. She retraced her steps. Same path, same terrain, but the clearing by the cliff was gone. No cabin, no no. No structure at all. Only her footprints from the day before, leading to an empty patch of snow and abruptly stopping. Like she'd walked up to something that wasn't there anymore. Back at base camp, 3 days later, she checked her phone again. It was working now. Normal. She scrolled to the black images she'd taken, except they weren't black anymore. They showed a room, yes, but not the one she remembered. There were no mirrors, no stain, just a single wooden chair in the center of the floor, and someone sitting in it. A figure, not clear, not detailed, just a silhouette, head tilted at an unnatural angle, hands resting on the arms of the chair, but the fingers were long. longer than human, almost curled around the armrests like vines. Marla didn't sleep for days after that. She sent the images to a friend in digital forensics who examined the metadata. The photos had been altered, but not after the fact. The data showed they had always looked that way. The black versions never existed. She posted a single image to an obscure climbing forum with a caption, "Have you ever seen this place?" Only one person replied. They said, "You found it too? Don't go back." I did. The second time, it remembered me. Since then, no one's been able to verify the cabin's location. Marla returned once, against her better judgment, but the trail was different. Steeper, colder. It didn't feel like Masora anymore. She said it felt older. There's a theory in certain circles, one that rarely leaves the darkest corners of folklore discussion boards, that some places don't exist in our world until you see them. That mountains, being ancient and largely untouched, hold folds in reality. Thin spots. And if you're tired, cold, alone, the mountain might unfold just enough to show you something you were never meant to see. The cabin was never on any map, but it was in her memory. And once it's in yours, the theory says it has a way back in. Even now, if you search her name and the mountain, you won't find much. A few grainy images, a time-stamped forum post, and one quote she gave in a podcast that's since vanished from the web. There wasn't a cabin on the mountain. The mountain was a cabin. What she meant by that, no one knows. But a climber who read the post decided to try the same route 2 years later. He went missing for 11 days. When they found him, he was barefoot, his gear untouched, standing in a snowfield with his eyes closed, repeating one word, reflections, over and over again. You ever feel the earth move beneath you? Not from an earthquake, but from something alive, burrowing just inches below your body? That's what two hikers felt one night at 9,000 feet elevation, and they were never able to explain it. They were seasoned climbers, not the flashy kind you see posing on Instagram, but quiet, prepared, and precise. Jake and Eliza had climbed half the Western Rockies over 5 years. Their goal that week was a lesser-known peak in Montana called Gray Bishop. It wasn't on many maps, and some locals claimed it had no summit at all, just an endless white ridge line that looped you back to where you started. That should have been a red flag. The hiking took them through pine forests so dense the sun barely touched the moss. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of their boots and that unnatural stillness that only exists in places untouched by time. Jake joked the trees felt like they were watching. Eliza didn't laugh. By the third day, they'd climbed above the tree line and set camp on a narrow plateau. No flat land, just a patch of sloped snow barely wide enough for a two-person tent. But it was the only place for miles without sheer drop-offs or loose shale. They pitched the tent, cooked freeze-dried food, and turned in early. The silence that night was suffocating, until the scratching started. It was faint at first, like a branch brushing the fabric. But branches don't scrape upward from beneath a tent. Jake sat up. Eliza was already awake, staring at him with wide eyes. Her hand was frozen over her sleeping bag zipper. Scratch, pause, scratch. It circled the tent slowly, not urgent like an animal, but methodical, controlled. Then digging. They both felt it. The faint vibration of disturbed snow and soil, the subtle sag of the tent floor, like a gopher or a person was tunneling beneath them. Jake hissed, "Get the headlamp." But when Eliza turned it on, the light flickered, then died. Fully charged. New batteries. Just dead. They sat in darkness, holding their breath. Then the sound stopped. Not faded, stopped. As if it had never been there. The tent was still. The mountain was quiet. But something had changed. The cold felt closer. Jake unzipped the tent slowly and peeked out. Moonlight bounced off the snowfield. No prints. No movement. Nothing. But the snow directly around their tent looked loose, subtly disturbed, like it had been scooped and then patted down again. They didn't sleep. At dawn, they packed and started descending. Nobody fussed. No discussion. Just a mutual understanding that they had stayed a night too long. But a mile down, Jake stopped. Where's the trail? The ridge had shifted. Paths they clearly remembered were now blocked by rock or covered by fresh snow. It was as if the mountain had rearranged itself overnight. And then they found the footprints. Single file, leading uphill, bare feet, deep impressions in the snow, toes splayed unnaturally wide. No stride pattern, just perfect, equidistant steps leading back toward where their tent had been. But they hadn't seen any prints earlier that morning. Nothing. It was like the thing had followed them after they left. They didn't speak again until they reached the forest. That's when Eliza said something that Jake would never forget. When I turned on the lamp, I saw it for a second. Jake asked what she meant. She hesitated. There was a hand, pressed up against the tent wall. From underneath. Not human. The fingers were wrong. Too many joints. She never mentioned it again. Neither did Jake. But back in town, when they went to upload their route to the climbing app, something strange happened. Their GPS file, automatically recorded through Jake's satellite watch, ended at 3:14 a.m. That's when they'd heard the scratching. It restarted an hour later, but the data showed they hadn't moved. According to the tracker, they were below the elevation of the ridge, by almost 30 feet, like the watch had recorded them as being underground. The data was corrupted after that, just static noise and a timecode loop. But when Jake scrubbed through the corrupted section frame by frame, he found a glitched photo, just one. It showed the inside of their tent, but it wasn't from any of their cameras. It was taken from the floor, angled upward, as if someone, or something, had been beneath them, looking up through the thin nylon as they slept. And Eliza's eyes were open. Underscore. What do you do when the thing that's hunting you doesn't follow from behind, but waits underground, buried beneath the stillness, listening for breath, learning your weight? They never returned to Gray Bishop. In fact, they stopped climbing entirely. Eliza moved out of state. Jake deleted his social media and changed his number. But sometimes, in winter, when the snow is heavy and the nights are long, Jake swears he hears it again. That gentle scratch, that rhythmic digging, like something is looking for the tent, still burrowed in the silence, still waiting beneath. Sound doesn't carry well at high altitudes, but that doesn't explain why I kept hearing his voice long after he was gone. It started on the 4th day of our ascent up Mount Astor, a forbidden peak by local standards, buried deep in the Cordilleras and barely touched by Western maps. The villagers at the base had warned us not to go, said it was cold in more ways than one. We thought they meant frostbite. We were wrong. It was me and Daniel, my climbing partner for the past 6 years. We'd summit places most climbers only read about. Ice falls, whiteouts, even a minor avalanche once. But this mountain felt different. The snow wasn't just silent. It was watching, as if the wind knew our names. By the 3rd day, Daniel started acting off. Slower, distracted. He kept turning around on the trail, staring at something just behind us. But there was nothing there. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Didn't you hear it?" That night, the mountains seemed louder than usual. Winds that howled like they had lungs. I woke up to Daniel unzipping the tent, stepping out into the darkness without a word. I called his name. No answer. Just that cursed wind. I pulled on my boots, rushed after him, but found nothing. No footsteps, no shadow, just endless white under a full moon that felt too close. I thought maybe he had gone to relieve himself, or was having a bout of altitude sickness. But after 20 minutes passed, then an hour, the panic sank in. I activated the GPS beacon we always carried and reported a missing climber. They said weather wouldn't permit a rescue for at least 48 hours. 48 hours. Alone. But that was just the beginning. The next morning, I heard Daniel's voice. Not faint, not distant. It was right behind me. "Hey, I think I found a trail up." I spun around, heart slamming against my ribs. No one. No tracks. Nothing but untouched snow and a still tent flap. My breath froze midair. I told myself it was just stress, my brain playing tricks. That can happen in the mountains, I knew. Thin air, sleep deprivation, isolation. But then it happened again. That night. Then again the next morning. Always the same voice. Friendly. Familiar. Reassuring. We're almost there. Just a little higher. You're not alone. At first, I responded. I even followed it once, leaving camp and tracing the voice through the snow. It was so vivid, so real. The way he used the sound on climbs, calm and focused. But every time I got closer, the voice would take on a strange cadence. Like it was echoing from a place it shouldn't be. Not bouncing off the cliffs, but crawling out from within them. I stopped responding, but didn't stop calling. By the 5th day, I found Daniel's glove, frozen, half-buried, a few hundred feet above our last camp. It was sliced open down the palm. Inside were scratch marks, human nail marks, as if he'd been digging with his bare hands. The snow around it was undisturbed. No animal tracks. No light. Just that one lonely glove like an offering. That night, I didn't sleep. The wind wasn't howling anymore. It was whispering in Daniel's voice, over and over. I found the summit. I found the summit. I found the summit. Only, we were still 2 days from the summit. That's when I realized something was wrong with the mountain itself. Not physically, spiritually. It was mimicking us, echoing us back like a mirror made of snow. I remembered what the villagers said. Cold in more ways than one. The phrase suddenly made sense. What if it wasn't the elements that swallowed climbers whole? What if the mountain learned them, memorized them, recreated them? I started noticing small things. My own voice echoing back before I'd even spoken. Footprints leading away from camp in the morning, when I'd been alone all night. The ice in my water bottle refreezing in shapes that looked like faces. And worst of all, I began anticipating what Daniel's voice would say. Because somehow, I already knew. I should have descended. But some part of me, some voice, convinced me to keep going. The higher I climbed, the more the boundary blurred. Daniel's voice became clearer, closer. It started sounding less like memory and more like command. Don't stop now. We're almost above it all. Then, on the 7th day, I reached a ridgeline that wasn't marked on any of our maps. An impossible outcrop, jagged and black, jutting out like bone from the mountain's spine. At its edge was a small opening, a cave or crevasse, perfectly round, like something bored into the rock from inside. From the darkness. You finally found me. Daniel's voice. I approached. My body wasn't mine anymore. It moved without question. The air inside the cave wasn't cold. It wasn't anything. No temperature. No wind. No pressure. Just emptiness. And the voice, now all around me, was no longer Daniel's. It was deeper, older. It didn't speak with words, but with knowing. And in that moment, I saw what this mountain really was. Not a place. A mouth. A thing that consumes. Not by eating, but by becoming. Daniel wasn't taken. He was copied. And now it wanted me too. My voice. My mind. My presence. Another echo to whisper through ice and storm to the next climber. The next soul too curious to turn back. I don't remember descending. I only know I woke up 3 days later in a ranger outpost, frostbitten, delirious, rambling in a voice they said wasn't mine. They said I kept speaking to someone who wasn't there, calling him Daniel. But I wasn't calling to Daniel. I was calling him out, because something followed me down the mountain. And sometimes, at night, when the wind slips through my window and the trees lean a little too far, I still hear him say, "You're not alone." And somewhere deep down, I believe him. It was still lodged there when the search team arrived, an old ice axe, weathered and rust-flecked, protruding from a fresh drift of snow almost 12,000 feet up. But no footprints surrounded it. No gear. No tracks leading away. Just the tool, planted firmly, as if someone had driven it in and vanished mid-motion. They say the axe didn't belong to any known climber on the mountain that week. And yet, when a ranger finally gripped the handle to pull it free, it was warm to the touch, as if someone had been holding it only moments before. No one ever came forward to claim it. And some who've studied the case insist it was never there to be claimed. Climbers talk about this ridge, an unassuming stretch of shale and thin ice most people underestimate, like it's alive. They call it the Hollow Traverse. From a distance, it looks harmless, a narrow ridge line no wider than a sidewalk, hugging the pale slope of the glacier above. But over the years, too many climbers have reported the same impossible details: vanishing ropes, footprints that lead in circles, and that ice axe appearing again and again where no one left it. The last known sighting was only 2 winters ago. A group of 3 climbers, all experienced alpinists, made camp near the ridge after an unexpected whiteout cut off their descent. They'd rationed supplies, anchored their tent, and planned to wait out the storm. But around midnight, one of them heard metallic tapping just outside the tent. At first, they assumed it was the wind snapping the guy lines against a crampon or a loose carabiner. But the tapping grew more deliberate, more rhythmic, like the sound of someone driving a pick in a hard-packed snow. Over and over. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2, 3. When they unzipped the tent door, nothing was there. No movement, no shadows in the swirling snow. Just that same axe, its head buried in the ice a few feet from their entrance. They left it alone, convinced it must have belonged to a party ahead of them. But by dawn, the axe had moved. It now stood upright beside the trail they'd marked on their GPS, like a silent warning. The unsettling part isn't merely that it appeared to move on its own. It's that no matter which route they tried to take down, the axe was already there, driven into the snow, waiting. Some hikers claim this is a psychological phenomenon, a kind of shared hysteria born from exhaustion, oxygen deprivation, and fear. But others suspect the object itself is an echo, something left behind by a climber who never really left the mountain at all. There is a story, never fully verified, about a solo mountaineer named Marcelin Havel who vanished on the Hollow Traverse in the late 1970s. His journal, recovered near the east face, contained only a few legible lines. The final entry read, "I have marked my passage with the axe, so I will not be forgotten." But his body was never found. No remains, no gear, but that journal, preserved in the ice. Some believe the axe is his, eternally reappearing to mark the place where he surrendered to the mountain. Skeptics point out there is no official record tying any one climber to the object. Yet multiple search and rescue teams have logged it in their reports, always describing it the same way. Ancient, scored with nicks and patches of rust, the leather grip worn smooth by decades of use. A piece of climbing history no one is willing to claim. Some locals believe that if you see the axe once, you're being warned. If you see it twice, it's an invitation to follow wherever it leads. That notion alone is enough to make seasoned mountaineers avoid the ridge entirely. And still, every season, someone reports finding it again. One climbing guide recounted a detail that never left him. He'd led a pair of clients along the traverse in clear weather. No wind, no storm to stir illusions. As they rounded a bend, he spotted the axe in the snowbank ahead. He recognized it immediately. He'd seen it 3 years prior, in almost the exact same place. Against his better judgment, he walked over to inspect it. He wanted to prove to himself that it was just an ordinary tool, nothing supernatural, nothing cursed. When he wrapped his glove around the handle, he swore he felt a vibration, like the faint hum of an electric current. And then, he insists, he heard breathing, close enough to fog the air around his face, though no one stood there. He left the axe exactly where he'd found it. And for the rest of the climb, he said, he felt something just behind him, something patient, almost expectant, watching every step he took. There are theories that the axe is a kind of totem, a marker that blurs the boundary between the living and whatever lies beyond these slopes. Some call it a psychogenic trigger. You see the axe, and it unspools every buried fear you brought up the mountain. Doubt, guilt, a yearning to belong to the silence. Others suspect it's a phenomenon deeper than hallucination, some imprint in the glacier itself, replaying a final act that never concluded. Because when you think about it, there's something about the mountains that resists closure. Weather erases trails. Ice buries evidence. Snow drifts smooth over any sign you were ever there. If you vanish today, tomorrow the ridge would look exactly the same. Only the axe would remain, A reminder that someone tried to leave their mark and was consumed anyway. And maybe that's the most unsettling possibility, that the axe is neither a warning nor a curse, but simply a monument to the way this place erases people. You can reach the summit. You can chart your route, record your triumph. But the mountain does not care. It will swallow your footprints, your stories, your name itself. All that remains is the suggestion that someone stood here once, someone who was certain their presence mattered, right up until the moment it didn't. Even now, some say if you stand alone on the hollow traverse at twilight, you'll hear that metallic tapping again. 1, 2, 3, and see a dark shape kneeling by the ice, as though driving the axe down into the ridgeline for the 100th time. And if you approach, hoping for a glimpse of who or what is leaving it behind, you'll find only the empty snow, the ridgeline disappearing into the mist, and the axe waiting, like it's been waiting for you all along. You're 9,000 feet up, the air is thinning, and the sun has vanished behind the ridge. That's when you spot it. 3 faint lights flickering deep in the valley. Headlamps, moving slowly, and in perfect formation. But when you radio base camp to check, they tell you something impossible. There's no one else up there but you. In 2021, a group of 4 experienced climbers, Jonas, Mira, Greg, and Alan, set out to summit Mount Breckham, a remote and rarely climbed peak nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest. The route was long, treacherous, and only partially mapped. Not many attempt it because of the unpredictable weather and unstable ice shelves that line its upper basin. But for this group, the danger was part of the appeal. The climb started like most: cold mornings, tense evenings, ice axes, crampons, knots. By day 2, they had reached a high-altitude saddle known as the Spine, a narrow ridgeline connecting 2 glacial shelves. It's a place most climbers cross quickly. Locals call it the Listening Ridge, a name with no clear origin, but one that had always stuck. That's when Jonas first noticed it. He paused to adjust his footing and happened to glance back down the trail. Far below, near the tree line, maybe 3,000 feet below, 3 tiny lights moved in the darkness. Headlamps, faint, flickering, weaving through the trees in near synchronization. Not unusual at first, until he realized something. The lights never changed elevation, never veered, never separated, just drifting forward, like they were tracing something ancient and predetermined. He called it out to the others, and they paused to watch. For nearly 10 minutes, the lights continued to move, slow, steady, methodical. No flashlights, no voices, just lights. Alan, the most skeptical in the group, chalked it up to another climbing team. Maybe a night ascent. It was odd, sure, but not impossible. Still, when they radioed base camp to check for any other sign-ins or scheduled expeditions on the mountain, the answer came clear and immediate. You're the only team logged on the route this week. No one else is up there. They dismissed it, or tried to. There are always things you can't explain in the wilderness. Lights reflect strangely off ice. Snow can play tricks. They agreed to ignore it and press on. But the moment they entered the Spine, everything changed. The weather dropped rapidly, far faster than forecast. Wind began to push from both sides of the ridge, something climbers know is rare at high elevation unless a storm's forming. But the sky was clear. Too clear. Not even a single wisp of cloud. Then the sound came. It began like static. A low, humming hiss, barely audible over the crunch of snow and ice. But it grew, rising into something almost rhythmic, like breathing. The team stopped, each one glancing at the other, unsure of what they were hearing. It was Mira who noticed it wasn't just sound. It was directional. The humming came in pulses, first from the west, then the east, then right beneath them. Vibrations in the steel of their crampons. A kind of resonance they could feel in their ribs. Not loud, but deep. They moved faster, choosing not to talk, just pushing through the final stretch of the Spine until they reached the next camp point, Dead Man's Hollow, a basin below the false summit. By the time they got there, the lights had returned. Except this time, they weren't below. They were parallel, at eye level, about 300 yards away, across the basin on a ledge that had no trail No access, no recorded route. 3 lights, bright white, moving together. Left pause, right pause, stop. Then they turned off. Completely. Mira swore they'd moved in response to their presence, as if they were being watched and followed. Greg tried to radio base again, only to find the signal was now distorted, like something was jamming it. The channel bled with static and occasional bursts of unintelligible words, almost like whispering. They set up camp for the night, hoping to recover and finish the climb by morning. That's when the dreams began. Each member of the team later admitted that night brought the most vivid, disjointed nightmares they'd ever had. Jonas dreamt of descending the mountain, only to find that no matter how far he climbed down, the terrain looped endlessly, always returning him to the same ridge. Alan dreamed of a cave that pulsed with warmth deep beneath the snow. Something was inside, whispering his name in a voice that mimicked his own. But Mira's dream was different. She didn't dream of climbing or snow. She dreamt of the lights. 3 of them, hovering over her sleeping body inside the tent. And in her dream, she couldn't move, couldn't scream, only listen. As the lights grew brighter, she heard a voice in her mind, not spoken, but pressed directly into her thoughts. A single phrase, "You are not the first." The next morning, the group was quiet, disturbed, but no one said it out loud. They packed quickly and decided to descend without summiting. The air had shifted. The trail felt unfamiliar. Despite being the same route, they'd just come up. Trees appeared warped. Landmarks seemed to vanish. At one point, they came across a rusted carabiner in the snow, half buried, old, and covered in frost. But it was attached to nothing. No anchor, no rope, no sign anyone had ever climbed there before. And then, the lights returned for the final time. Midway through the descent, in the narrowing fog, they saw them again, just ahead, cutting through the mist. Only this time, they were in front of the group, leading them, step by step. At first, Alan thought it might be another team after all. Maybe they'd joined the descent path without radio contact. But when they picked up pace to catch them, the lights always stayed just far enough ahead, never letting them close the distance, never fully visible. By the time they reached the base of the mountain, all radios came back to life. Warmth returned to the air. Wind patterns normalized. It was as if the mountain had finally released them. Jonas, shaken but composed, immediately checked the sign-in logs again. Still no other climbers. No expeditions. No helicopters. No recorded movement on the route besides their team. And yet, footprints had been found near their base camp. Faint, just outside the perimeter. No thread, no known boot pattern. Just imprints. 3 sets. In perfect parallel. The lights were never seen again. But every member of that team reported hearing the same sound in the days that followed, while lying in bed, walking alone, or waiting in silence. That faint, rhythmic humming, just beneath the noise of the world, just enough to remind them. Some mountains don't want to be climbed. Some things don't want to be found. And sometimes, you are never truly alone, no matter how high you go. Found our gear, our footprints, even remnants of our camp. But the rescue pilot swore we were never on a mountain. And yet, somehow, I still remember the cold breath on my neck that night, whispering, "Don't look down." It started as a straightforward climb. Nothing technical, just a 3-day ascent on Mount Marin, a lesser-known peak in the Rockies, but one that drew thrill-seekers because of its remoteness. We were 4 in total, me, Marcus, Elena, and Nate. All experienced climbers, all confident, all wrong. Mount Marin had a strange reputation among locals. Not cursed exactly, but wrong. That's the word one gas station attendant used when we mentioned it. The weather doesn't act right up there, he said, and sometimes the mountain sounds like it's breathing. We laughed it off. Day 1 was uneventful, if eerie. The trees thinned faster than expected, and there were no birds, none. Just whined through the stone, like breath through broken teeth. That night, while camped just above the tree line, I dreamed of a figure watching us from the ridge. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there as the moon passed over it. I told myself it was just altitude messing with me. But then Marcus mentioned the same figure the next morning. Same spot, Same posture. We shrugged it off and pressed on. Day 2, the trail got steeper, narrower. At some point, we lost the marked route and ended up scrambling across loose shale, clinging to frost-slick rock. That's when Elena saw it, a light blinking from somewhere far above where the peak should have been hidden in cloud. A blinking, white light like a headlamp. But we were alone. We called out. No answer. We assumed maybe another team had gone rogue like us, finding their own path up. The cold was cutting deeper now, more than it should have at this elevation. Nate started shivering hard, and we decided to camp early. That night was the first time we heard it. A slow, low grinding noise like stone against metal, echoing from above. It came and went in pulses. Not natural, not wind. It sounded deliberate. At 3:12 a.m., Marcus sat bolt upright in his bag and whispered, "Someone's circling the tent." I didn't want to believe it, but I heard it too, soft crunching in the snow. But there were no shadows, no silhouettes. Just the sound, revolving around us, always just out of sight. Nate unzipped the flap in a panic and stuck his head out. Nothing. No tracks. No movement. Just white silence. By morning, Elena was gone. Not missing gone. Her sleeping bag was zipped flattened. Her boots and pack were still there. But no sign of her. No prints, no drag marks, not even a trace of body heat when I checked with my thermal scope. It was like she had never been there. Nate wanted to head back immediately. Marcus agreed. I was halfway between panic and disbelief. But as we turned to descend, we realized we couldn't. The trail had changed. The ridgeline was wrong. Paths we had taken hours earlier no longer existed. Markers had vanished. Boulders had shifted. It was like the mountain was alive, subtly rearranging itself. Or worse, like we'd stepped into a version of it that wasn't ours. We spent hours trying to retrace our steps, but ended up higher than before. Around midday, we spotted something that made my blood run cold. Our own campfire still burning. We had walked in a circle, an impossible one. We decided to use the emergency beacon. I activated it, heart hammering, and we waited. The snow picked up fast. Thick, suffocating, wide-out conditions. We huddled in a makeshift shelter and listened to the wind scream through the cliffs. That's when I saw him. Not in person. In my mind. A figure, tall and lean, standing at the edge of the cliff above us, staring down. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were glowing faintly blue. Every time I blinked, he was closer. When I looked up for real, nothing was there. But Marcus was mumbling something. He was reciting coordinates. Not the mountains, but somewhere deep in the Arctic Circle. I asked where he got them. He just said he told me. I didn't ask who. That night, Nate snapped. He said he could hear Elena calling to him. He left the shelter at midnight and never came back. When a helicopter came the next morning, I nearly cried. It hovered above the clearing, and I waved the emergency blanket like my life depended on it. I could see the pilot's face through the glass. His eyes went wide when he spotted us. Marcus and I were airlifted off that mountain, hypothermic and nearly unconscious. When we landed, rangers rushed over, taking vitals, logging the incident. That's when the pilot approached me, visibly shaken. He asked, "How did you get up there?" I thought he meant the path we took. But then he added, "That peak's been closed for over a year. We haven't had a soul up there since the avalanche last spring. There are no trails, no working beacons. We monitor this range. No one's been there." I laughed, confused, thinking it was a mistake. But then he showed me the flight map. Our coordinates didn't match Mount Marin. In fact, there was no peak where he found us. Just a flat, snow-covered plateau. No cliffs, no trailhas, no elevation data. But I remember the climb, the cliffs, the camp, Elena, Nate. Marcus remembers too, but his story keeps changing. One day, he says Elena never existed. Another, he says I was the one who vanished. He's in a care facility now. I still have nightmares. About the figure, about the whisper that told me, "You were never meant to see this." Sometimes I dream I'm still up there, still trapped. Other times, I'm sure I never came back down.